Hey, this is Eric from Cafe Watercolor. Thank you for joining me in a new painting demo. So today I want to share with you a new portrait of my wife. I did this painting as her Valentine's Day gift. Of course, I paint her multiple times every single year, so this is more or less just an excuse for me to paint her. So the photo was taken by me last year. At the end of the year, we did a photo shoot. She dressed up quite nicely and I thought that was great for a painting, so I took several shots of her. And this is one of the photos. I really like the overall mood and the lighting of this particular shot. I just feel that sense of peace and it really shows her elegance and gracefulness. And even though we don't really see her face, I feel like the whole atmosphere, the whole feeling of the picture is a really good representation of her, at least my personal feeling towards her. So it's pretty important that we have a solid drawing for the painting. So I start out with a pretty dull 4B pencil and I just very lightly draw on the paper, trying to get the proportion and the position of the figure, the head, the body, and the hand. We just get everything in, and then I'll come back in now with a mechanical pencil, it's a sharper pencil, and start to paint some darker marks so that it'll be easier for me to paint. It's very important that you get the basic proportion and structure down first before you think about any sort of details. So as you can see, I actually didn't draw any finger just yet, because if you focus on detail too early, you can miss out the overall big picture and the overall proportion and the position relationship of everything. And it can be very frustrating if you focus on the detail, spend a lot of time drawing details like fingers and the facial features, only to realize that the proportion is off. Now you have to erase and do that all over again. That can really kill your motivation and morale. So it's very important that just stay loose at first, figure out the proportion and everything, and then when you are sure where things are, then you start to spend a little bit more time drawing the details and stuff. Here I'm starting to draw her hand. Her hands are the tricky part of this painting because we see a lot of finger, almost all of the fingers, and there's also a little bit of foreshortening of her left hand. So we need to make it look somewhat believable, that there's believable amount of foreshortening, and at the same time all the fingers need to be there. And it's important to look at hands as a three-dimensional form. Even though we see pretty much the top of the hand of the fingers, it's still important to keep in mind how it works three-dimensionally. Each fingers is like a small cylinders and so on. And it's also very important to get the size of the hand right as well. Like I said, if you focus on the detail too early, you might miss out the big relationship between the hand and the head. If the hand is too small in relationship with the face, then it's going to look really awkward. So here I'm doing the first wash. So the first wash is the light value, so the light skin tone and her beige shirt, as well as the orange shirt inside. I just need to cover it all. And it's okay if the colors start to bleeding to each other a little bit. While it is still wet, I am doing a little bit of wet on wet on her face, just to get a little bit of transition from dark to light. So the interesting thing about this portrait is that the face is actually not a big part of this painting. So it's important to keep it simple. So the face is actually an easy part of this portrait since we don't really see her eyes as well, just the profile view of her nose and the mouth. Since her eyes is mostly covered by the hair, I really don't need to paint all that much. So a little bit of the dark on the wing of the nose and the lip, just to get a little bit more form and dimensionality for it. Giving a little bit of the dark for the eye socket, And since the face is starting to dry, I decided to just go ahead and start to paint the hair. Now the hair is much darker, but I start with a lighter value so I can build on top of that. So just an overall tone. I like to give a little bit of blue on top of the hair. It's just something that I do to have a little bit more color variations. And I start to add some darker tone wet onto the hair. The thing about hair is that you need to show the volume of the hair, not just the individual hair strand detail. Now I'm using Trekell brush, so it has a very fine point. I can use that to have a little bit of details on the silhouette of the hair, get some hair strand, and almost a little bit graphic-like quality to it. That's where most of the details of the hair should be, is around the edges, the silhouette of it. The majority volume of the hair, you just need to show the volume of it. So just the light and the dark, treat it as one single shape with some value and color variation within it. So I start out with a lighter value, and as I paint wet onto wet, I start to mix darker and thicker mixtures for the dark of the hair. So as you can see, the hair has decent amount of volume, and at the edge, the silhouette, I start to have a little bit more details and hair strands. But it's really not that complicated if you treat it as a single shape. A lot of time when you keep things simple and you just add a little bit of detail in the right place, then it will look sophisticated, as opposed to putting details everywhere. It start to lose detail because it just become noise. Couple hair strand under her chin, those are actually behind her, and that creates a invisible edge, so you'll be able to tell where her chin line is. It's important to create edges, not to outline what you see. So I continue down and start to paint the inner layer of her outfit, which is the orange shirt inside of her beige shirt. And this is actually my favorite part of the painting. It's quite simple, but just the contrast of light and the dark, where the cast shadow meets the form shadow. So I did a little bit of wet onto wet to get that soft transition from light to dark, and now I'm going to use a darker paint to paint the cast shadow. So her beige shirt is blocking the light, so that's why we see this sharp cast shadow following the contour of her chest, and that merged with the dark on her waist. So just a couple light and a dark, hard and soft edge in that area that creates this nice lighting and form. So I started to work on her beige shirt. So the material of the beige shirt is a little bit stiffer, so the folds and the creases on the shirt is a lot more prominent. So a couple suggestive detail on the sleeve, and here's the same thing. We got a cast shadow from her sleeve onto her forearm, so we have a hard edge here. And now I'm starting to paint the hand. This is probably the toughest part of the painting because just the sheer amount of the fingers that I need to paint. And I want to make each of them look dimensional, but I also don't want to overdo the detail. So a little hints of the knuckle wet onto wet, and I leave a little bit of the light on her ring finger. And also her thumb, this part of her thumb is receiving the light. So there's just a lot of the light and the dark detail there. But as long as you keep the big relationship of the light and dark, it shouldn't be too complicated. The back of her hand is receiving light, while her fingers are mostly in the dark. So I'm adding some more occluded shadow between her fingers because those finger gaps are creating some really dark values there. And while I have some dark mixed already, I'm just gonna use them and paint some more occluded shadow from her sleeve to her arm and also her left hand. So the trick here is really to just paint light and dark and use the contrast, the lighting, to describe the form, describe the structure. and trust the viewer will able to see the detail within it, details that you didn't paint. So I paint my wife so many times already, but I just never really get tired of it. I feel like each time I paint her, it sort of rekindle my love to her. And for this one specifically, I'm really not focusing on her face, it's just her overall presence. And like what I said in the beginning of the video, I'm really trying to capture her gracefulness and elegance. So that's why I decided to pick a photo that she actually look away instead of just looking at camera and smile. So here I'm working on the dark side of her shirt. Again, keeping it simple and connect the shape. Connecting shape is very important. It will keep your overall value read very clear and your painting will just look cleaner. So now I want to start working on the background. So I actually pre-wet the paper there so that I can have some nice soft shapes in the background. So kind of similar to camera's bokeh, things that are not focused is a little bit more blurry, great for background. So here I'm really careful painting around the face. Now this will make her face really just pops out and create that sense of space in the background. Adding a little bit more value, add a little bit more variation, wet onto wet, and then we can move on to the shirt again. We need to add a little bit of the darker value there. So mixing a darker value. So her armpit area, where we got some really dark fold, the occluded shadow. So what I did is I paint a dark shape and I will soften the shape as needed with a damp brush. So there's a lot of the beautiful detail on her shirt. So I'm just using a smaller brush trying to do a little bit of suggestive detail. Adding a little bit more hair. Just make it a little bit more sophisticated. Here adding some more dark and also soften some of the edges as needed. Adding a few more details on her sleeve. Just a couple of them, you don't need to overdo it. And now we're pretty much finished with the figure, but the background is a little bit plain. So I actually painting the background. Background is actually a very important thing in this case, otherwise she's just floating in space. By adding some background, it kind of anchors her down a little bit, create some sense of space and atmosphere. So quite a bit of bead in the bottom. So I just take the pad, hold it vertically and hit the bottom a little bit to force them drip down. This is something that I start to do because I don't feel like painting edge to edge all the time. So a little bit of dripping actually kind of helps and make it look quite interesting. Paint the wall behind her and create that edge for the white sofa. A bit of window seal. And I want to add just a little bit more dark right next to her. So while the wash is still wet, I just add some more dark there. And since it's wet onto wet, the dark shape is going to be very soft. So that just kind of creates a little bit more variation as well as more sense of space. Darken her hair just a little bit more, unified it. And here is the finished painting. I actually go back in and slightly indicate her hip as well so that it doesn't look that empty underneath. So the painting look more complete. So I really like how this painting turns out and I hope you enjoy this demo. I'm Eric from Trekell Watercolor. I hope you have a wonderful day wherever you are. See you next time.